Hello viewers and welcome to another video. So the other night I was out just taking some photos. I was using a couple of rolls of film. I had a roll of Amber 800 and a roll of Cinestill 800. I was just planning to push process by 2 stops, do one of those things where I walk around and take photos at night. When I was getting to the end of one of my rolls, I figured it might be a cool idea to just try and recreate some of the shots that I've been taking across both film stocks so I could bring it back here and do a bit of a side-by-side comparison of the two types of film and see where their differences are, where the strengths and weaknesses might be. So they're both similar-ish kind of films in the way that they're being processed and the way that the colors are balanced. So I think it makes sense to do a bit of a comparison this way and see which one may be applicable or if one of them is better than the other one. So let's go and jump in and take a bit of a deeper look at it. Alright, so obviously some issues that you can see straight off the bat. The Cinestill shot is on the left, the Amber shot is on the right. The Cinestill shot is out of focus and the Amber shot has this big light leak right in the middle of the frame, which is pretty frustrating. It's kind of something that, you know, might be cool if you're after sort of some experimental effects, but it might also ruin one of your shots if you're framing up something and then you get this big blob of light in the middle of it. But looking at the balancing of the images, I guess you see they're fairly similar. The Amber's maybe a little bit grainier and it's substantially warmer in its tones. So whether that works for you, I personally prefer colder kind of tones, but there may be times when you want something that comes out a bit warmer. Okay, so same deal here, Cinestill on the left, Amber on the right. And there's a lot less warmer lights going on here. So I think you see the two images looking a bit more even. Obviously I focused on the people in the Cinestill shot and I'm focusing more on the window in the Amber shot. You do see the Amber looking a little bit warmer again, but I think probably something worth calling out here is just in the shadow detail. So the Cinestill is quite clean, where in the shadows where the light starts to fall off, you really start to notice that grain in the Amber film. And I think that's sort of a consistent theme I sort of see across all these images, which I'll go through in a bit more detail here. Obviously this shot messed up the orientation, so one's portrait, one's landscape, but you definitely see the difference between Cinestill being a bit colder, Amber being a bit warmer, and that fall off in the shadows, Amber becoming quite a lot grainier. You don't notice it so much in the highlights, or at least I didn't notice it so much in the highlights. But what I do notice is on these lights here, there's blooming, which we kind of expect with both of these types of films. But I noticed that the reds a little bit, and more so oranges, which I'll see in some later photos, they tend to render a lot better in terms of not blowing out the highlights the way that it does on Cinestill. So it seems to sort of be a warmer film and respond better to a lot of warm content, you know, a lot more reds and oranges and yellows. This shows just some of the things I've been talking about before as well, with a bit more noise in the shadows on the Amber and the cleaner sort of look in the shadows and midtones on the Cinestill. You do kind of notice up in these in these yellow lights, the gradients render a bit more smoothly in the Amber, where the Cinestill is it's looking a bit flat to my eyes. They're both pleasing. I probably prefer the colder tones, even though it's an overall warm image. But you do notice, I think, Amber's a bit stronger in rendering some of those yellow and orange and red colors. Okay, so this is probably part one of two. It's not part one of two, they're just images, all right? So this is something where it shows probably one of the big strengths that I noticed of Amber, and that's in its rendition of highlights. So you can see between these two images, and apologies, I wasn't able to make sure that I had exactly the same settings for both images, but the highlights have blown out quite a bit on the Cinestill image, where they're rendering a bit flatter on the Amber film stock. So the exposure between the two shots looks fairly similar, I think in the shadows and the midtones, but I think in those highlights, just in this front section around the road, the Amber's retained a lot of the highlights, where on Cinestill it's blown out quite a bit. I think this is very apparent in I think this is very apparent in this image here. So it's not exactly the same subject matter, but this is Cinestill on the left again, Amber on the right. You can see that the yellows have just blown out completely into this big blob where you retain a lot of that detail in the amber shots there. And that's kind of what I noticed throughout all this. In addition to rendering the warm tones a lot more naturally, it tended to not blow them out as much. The cost of that is that it looks like it's a noisy film for 800 ISO. So it looks like there's a bit more sort of shadow detail to come here, and the noise in the amber is just really, really present here. The 800 looks, by comparison, like it almost has no noise, and everything's just rendered really evenly. Where the amber shot is very grainy, the grain is very apparent. Okay, so that is it all done. If I had to pick between these two film stocks, look, I'm probably going to pick Cinestill because it just seems to render more consistent results. The grain in the shadows is a lot better. The colors are a lot more even. The biggest issue with Amber for me is the potential for light leaks to get in there and ruin a handful of your shots. But that said, you know, if you're able to control those lighting conditions and you don't mind some of those risks with some of the experimental kind of stuff coming into your photos, then, you know, Amber can be a really good option there. I will say that between these two film stocks, the scans did not need that much in terms of color correction, if any at all. A couple of videos back, sometime last year, I did a roll of Portrait 800, and whilst that was pretty good, it did also result in some pretty drastic color shifts that I'm just not seeing nearly as much. That's another thing to keep in mind, is that both of these film stocks responded really well to push processing. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.